Right, good morning everybody. Welcome to the corporate review meeting of the 16th of November. We are broadcasting and we've got the general apologies, and then there's another apology that I want to make after that. In terms of member apologies for lack of absence, we do have some. Jonathan's taking the notes today.
Yes, Chairman, we've had an apology from Mr. Peters, Bernard Peters, James Salisbury and Jeremy Oates.
Okay, any other apologies that we should know about? No? Okay, I do know that Councillor Salisbury has asked to have a little bit of time away from the duties, and I think the leader is going to look at a replacement for our next meeting. The general apology I want to make is in terms of the paperwork that we've had. Members will be aware that we've had an officer missing, and we've had issues with getting the paperwork out this time. So my apologies on behalf of the committee that what should be a pack of 256 pages, quite a weighty tome at the best of times, was only sent out yesterday. So I, including with other people, haven't had the full chance to digest and do my normal scrutiny, which normally involves a weekend in my case. I haven't had the opportunity, so I can only apologise on behalf of the officers that we've not been able to do that. If you went on the weekend, you will have found that all but one of the items was on the agenda, which was the impact on equalities was missing. But everything else was available to go out on Friday. Unfortunately, it didn't. So we're all in the same boat of having to do what we can based on only 24 hours to scrutinise. It is also noticed that there are some errors or omissions in the paperwork, which isn't ideal, some duplicated items, and as I think one party conference once said, there's a piece where it even says insert comment here, which isn't ideal either. So it's not a very good set of notes. Obviously, I will take that further, and we're aware of some of the issues that are behind that. Okay, we'll go on to item 2, which is the declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest to make? No? Okay, we go on to the minutes then of the 7th of September and the 5th of October. I haven't seen those minutes. So again, this is something that's we're going to have to pick up on. We need to have those minutes signed off correctly as a true record. So the minutes of the 7th of September and 5th of October will accompany these when we next meet. So that brings us on to item 4, which is the Integrated Performance Report, which hopefully is familiar to members. Even the newer members will have seen this once before, but there are some adaptations and changes that have been made to the format. And we have here the leader, Councillor Alan White, and we have John Tradewell. Do I pass over to Alan? Do you want to take it first?
Yes, please. Thank you very much indeed, Chairman. And may I apologise for the quality of the paperwork that has come through to you as Chairman of the committee. I appreciate your forbearance, and we will attend to it. John Tradewell has picked it up, and we will attend to it so it doesn't happen again. The Integrated Performance Report for Quarter 2 went to Cabinet on the 20th of October, and this is your opportunity, Mr. Chairman, and your committee to examine the performance of the organisation during that quarter. We spend a lot more time during informal cabinets and cabinets now looking at our performance. It's key to the success of the organisation. So what I'd like to do is just draw your attention to some highlights within the report and then leave it to your committee to ask questions on the details. Quarter 2 has again been affected by COVID-19, but I'm delighted to report that there is an increasing percentage of adults across Staffordshire who've had 2 jabs. At the time of the report, around 82% of adults had received 2 jabs. Certainly, Councillor Atkins on this committee is a member of the Local Outbreak Control Board. That sits every fortnight and examines the progress that this authority is making across the county, keeping on top of the progress of the pandemic and making suggestions as how we can improve certainly in hotspot areas. The hotspot areas for the pandemic change fairly regularly. At the moment, this week it's East Staffordshire again, who have been top for some time, but then they dropped down the league table, but it just changes depending on circumstances. There's no prediction of what will happen. During the course of this reporting period, we saw the Chancellor's, in fact the Prime Minister's statements around care cap, the £86,000 care cap and the 1.25% increase on national insurance. We're still awaiting some details about that and how it will affect the authority, but there will be an effect. It is welcome that somebody has at long last grasped the nettle on social care costs, but it's whether or not we have enough money to deliver what the government's expecting of us remains to be seen. We've received significant additional grant funding during the course of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that's set out in the report. During the course of the previous quarter, we reported that we were on track for a saving of 8.119 million, or 1.5% at quarter one. That has reduced to 1.992 million, or 0.4% at quarter two. We're still delivering good value for taxpayers, and you've got the recommendations for on the report for you to read. Just going through by directorate, health and care, in particular, the performance of Nexus has been outstanding. Nexus is the arm's length subsidiary that the County Council has. It's delivering when we need it to, and it's delivering great quality care. The Local Outbreak Control Board, which I've referred to a moment ago, continues to sit. It sits fortnightly and monitors the progress of the pandemic and our response and other organisations' response to as we move forward. Testing has been a success story for the County Council, as has the vaccine rollout. We're hoping that booster uptake continues or continues to improve, because we're not as quick at getting the boosters out as we have been as getting the vaccines out. Moving forward to families and communities, we rate that as amber. Children's transformation continues apace. Having started a couple of weeks ago, transforming the children's service to a place-based service, but the numbers of children in care are still relatively high, but we anticipate those to start to come down in the not too distant future. We had the opportunity to speak to the Regional Schools Commissioner last week. Spent an hour with him talking about the improvements we're hoping to have with the schools and the academies, and that was a worthwhile and fruitful meeting. We did make the point about fair funding for children in Staffordshire. Our allocations of funding are lower than many other authorities, and we need to continue to lobby to get a fair allocation of funding for our school children. In EIS, the household waste recycling centres, the in-housing continues. You'll recall it was subcontracted out to a third party, and we've been bringing it in over the past few months, and that continues. The High Streets Fund is a notable additional funding for the county, and also apprenticeships. We've got about 147 apprenticeships have been taken up so far. A great success story, of course, is the enterprise centres. We've been delighted to see the enterprise centres going at a pace, and I hope that will continue. The climate change agenda in EIS, some members here will have attended the climate change event for members. I thought that was a very good event. I think that the number of ideas that came forward exceeded our ability to actually deal with them. So I thought that was very successful. Some of the ideas were a little off-piste, but, worthwhile listening to. And the final point in EIS, which undoubtedly you will see in the press, is our response to the survey that we undertook for the temporary vacant seat scheme, the decision around which is due shortly. Moving forward to corporate, it's John Tradewell's area, so if I get this wrong, then I'm in trouble. Sales of county assets have continued to yield income to us, which is part of our corporate plan, or MTFS, around £17 million at this quarter. The Members Fund has been launched again, as you're aware, and just finally on employment aspects, sickness absence rates have not got any worse over the past quarter, which is good news. Finally, on the finance section, the COVID grant spend is set out in the report for you, Mr. Chairman, for members of the committee to examine. So in broad terms, Mr. Chairman, that's the highlights of the report. I'm happy to take any questions on the details. I don't know if John Tradewell wants to come in, but that's all I've got to say for now.
Mr. Tradewell, did you want to comment before we question?
No, just to add my apologies to those of the Chair, to the members for the late delivery of the papers on this matter.
Councillor Charlotte Atkins.
Well, I haven't had a chance really to look at this paper in great detail as I had a meeting last night, but I would like to know about the backlog for adult social care assessments and what percentage of those assessments lead to a denial of care.
I can't give you an answer to that directly at this meeting, Mr. Chairman, but may I take that away and get back to you in writing? Could you?
Okay, can I ask a question in terms of the headline figures on redeployment costs? There's a 3.2 million cost for redeployment under children's services. The question really is that we, obviously in restructuring, we're trying to get more people to the coalface, probably the wrong expression now with climate change, but to the front services. And if that is the case, are we therefore going to spend as much as that on redeployment? Presumably we're looking to get more people into levels of job in the lower parts of the structure. And does that not necessarily mean perhaps paying over the odds for the roles rather than redeployment, rather than redundancy, I should say?
Mr. Chairman, my understanding is a good chunk of that is accounted for through redundancy payments for people who are moving to leaving the organisation and going elsewhere. The place-based approach does get far more members of staff out to the coalface, as you put it. So I will get back to you, and I'll check those numbers and get back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and I've got another one on item 41, which is about street lights and traffic signals. It's referring to 25% reduction. As my simple understanding is that we save money by having green energy. So why are we at 25%, and when will we be complete on that? Is there a target date for completion?
Again, Mr. Chairman, on points of very great detail like that, I'm afraid I can't give you an answer directly. The portfolio holder, well, I'll speak to the portfolio holder and get you an answer to that one.
Councillor Pertz next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning. And apologies for being late and missing some of the leaders' enlightening statement. I've got a range of questions, but I'm just going to sort of restrict them to two at this moment and then come back if you'll allow me. The first one relates to paragraph 4, page 6, which relates to just let me get it, and then I'm spot on. It relates to a paper that the Council's Cabinet has outlined the importance of the role of care homes that they've played during the pandemic and the impact that it has had on the care market. I wonder whether you'd be kind enough to share that report with the Health and Care Overview and Scrutiny Committee, because we have a session to review the impacts of COVID on the long-term nature of the care market, and that might be an informative paper to get the Cabinet's position on. That's the first one. Should be relatively easy. The second one is more difficult. If I look at what's in top of my post bag, it's normally potholes. It's normally flooding. It's normally highways matters. And yet, for weeks and weeks and weeks, months and months and months, it's been the temporary vacant seat scheme. Now, for many members who are in town areas, you know, the vacant seat scheme getting those children aged 16 and over to school, to further education, is probably not an issue. Probably doesn't even hit the radar. But for a rural member, it disproportionately hits us because of the sheer volume of children who are affected in not being able to get a seat to school. This is compounded when they see buses going by with empty seats on them, going from literally where they are, starting, all the way to the same school that they've got to get to. I think that this has been an unmitigated disaster because it's been going on so long. And I wonder whether the leader would be able to give us an indication in terms of hard and fast dates, given the consultation finished on this at least a month ago. I wonder whether he can give us some indications as to when we can actually go back to our residents with the picture as to what the council is going to do to help those parents who have been badly affected by it. Thank you.
Councillor White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that Councillor Pert's division in particular has been hard hit by the temporary vacancy scheme survey, and indeed there have been parents who've been in touch with the authority from your division with those issues. A decision is due imminently this side of Christmas, so that it'll give parents some certainty. It wasn't a consultation; it was a survey. There is a subtle difference, and I have to stick with that subtle difference. What we have, the survey has shown some interesting facts relating to those people who are affected by this. The first and foremost is that a good number of those people who are affected by the temporary vacant seat scheme are not far away from a commercial bus route in any event. I don't know the details within your division, Councillor Pert, but certainly the survey has indicated that that is the case. There is a case for encouraging people children who are not able to get onto the buses anymore to use the commercial buses in order to support those in getting to their place of education. There are some issues that have been highlighted through the course of the survey that we do need to attend to, because there are some, I suppose you might describe them in the jargon as wicked problems relating to this. And we need to be looking at those in some detail. We, as an authority, are subjected to government regulations on passenger vehicles and the implementation of the access rules around passenger vehicles, and we have to make sure that they are adhered to. So, decision is due imminently. We do understand that there are ways for children to get to school, but there are going to be some hard issues for some families to deal with, and we are looking at those in detail. Anything to add to that?
Well, just to say, it is on the agenda for the 15th of December Cabinet, so it should be dealt with then.
Come back.
Thank you, Leader. I certainly appreciate it's a wicked problem. There is no win or easy answer to this. I would appreciate if we could put in an appeals process as part of that, so that those who are most disadvantaged can put their case clearly, and that can be heard fairly with a view of trying to find a way to ensure that they're not disadvantaged or disenfranchised from further education.
That's a very good suggestion, Mr. Chairman, and I'll pick that up with the portfolio holder.
Okay. Councillor Jill Heath.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I hear what the leader's saying about using the public transport, but we ain't got no public transport in the Moorlands. There is no public transport to be had. And, climate change, we had the meeting here about climate change. We hear so much about unnecessary car journeys. So, the bus that the child has gone to school on until 16 or 11 if they were less than 2 miles but more than 3, suddenly goes past the lane end of the farm or house where they live, half empty or 3/4 empty, and their mum and dad, because they are 3 miles, 4 miles, 5 miles away, have to get the car out and follow the bus in. Where does that fit in with your climate change policy, apart from anything else? And it's just a nonsense. And to say use public transport, well, we ain't got any. Okay, we've got a grant in the Moorlands, and we're going to have this Moorlands Connect procedure coming on board January. I think it's the tag. But that takes you to a hub, and the hub then you can catch a bus into Buxton, Ashbourne or Leigh. It won't take them to school. And, we've got the school buses, and they're not fully used. it doesn't take much working out. It's just a silly situation, really.
Councillor White?
Yeah, I agree with Councillor Heath. It is a silly situation. And the situation is imposed upon us by the regulations that we have to abide by. And these regulations have been in place for many, many years, but haven't been adhered to. My understanding is that there was a gentleman in South Yorkshire, a disability rights campaigner, I understand, who hasn't got children, took it to court, and we find ourselves having the regulations enforced, and that's a very unfortunate set of circumstances. It's the Department of Transport and Parliament determine these regulations, Mr. Chairman.
Could I just come back? I understand that Derbyshire County Council had dispensation from the rules that were coming out. They've still continued to collect their children in Derbyshire. My division, Derbyshire, goes in and out of North Staffordshire, and the children there are going to school with this. Have we ever asked for dispensation?
I don't know the answer to that, Councillor Heath, but I'll chase it up and find out what Derbyshire County Council is doing. Derbyshire has more income than us, and so they may have some spare cash floating around that enables them to do that. Well, the problem is, no, it wouldn't. You're quite right, but because of the passenger service vehicle regulations, that's what we're up against. But to your point about the climate change agenda, no, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense that we have to put kids in cars in order to get them to school when there's a bus there. So, hands tied. Fair point.
Okay, Councillor Samantha Thompson.
Mine's just a small one, and I may have missed it. Going on about COVID, I know the government brought in, was it a week ago or so, about the carers having to have the jab. Have we lost many people through that?
Mr. Chairman, Councillor Thompson and I get a weekly report of the number of carers who've been jabbed. And in fact, we've got the chairman of the Health Scrutiny Committee, who's the one who instigated the weekly report on the jabs. I saw mine late last week. I think there's only a very small percentage. But I'm looking to Councillor Pert to help me out because he pays a great deal of attention to this. There's a very small percentage across Staffordshire who haven't had the second jab. So I'm hopeful that we don't lose too many. Can I defer to Councillor Pert, the instigator?
Councillor Pert is ready and waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not often I have to answer on behalf of the leader, but from a scrutiny point of view, we do monitor the level of care home staff that are vaccinated. The figure from Monday was 98.5% have received their first dose or have an exemption, and 96.8% of care home staff have the second dose or have an exemption. There are, just for reference, 30.6% of staff who've had a booster and 3% have had their flu jabs. I think it's probably a testament to the work that's been done within the County Council to encourage the level of uptake in vaccine through care home staff, because these figures are certainly well in excess of what we've seen when we've compared them with Birmingham and Wolverhampton. And they are a credit to those people who have been working proactively from the Health and Care Directorate with care homes to persuade their staff to be vaccinated and to address any concerns that individuals might have through taking a vaccine. Thank you.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Thompson? Okay, Councillor Conor-Wildman.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just for those who may have had the report late, paragraph 44, there's a appendix 2. There's a nice table which shows the amount of children in our care. Clearly a concern that it's showing an increase, and we wanted to see a decrease on children's transformation. The numbers have gone since January 2021 from 1,225 to 1,268, and that exceeds the number that we were expecting in the business case. Do we have an update now? Because July's figures are potentially out of date. It'd be nice to understand where it is now and if it is starting to follow the line that we were expecting.
Are we able to answer that, Councillor White?
Yeah, we're still around the 1,260 mark, I understand, it has got off to a slower start than anticipated, but I think that there are a range of factors that contribute to that. One is the delay in the courts at the moment, which has been a problem for some time now, but that is not the entire reason for it. There are a multitude of factors playing into this, but we are monitoring it very, very carefully because it is an integral part of our medium-term financial strategy and the savings plan that we are expecting through Children's Services. So we'll keep the committee informed as further details come out.
Okay, we've touched on the subject of COVID, and I had a question prepared on one of the figures. It's on page 19 of the report or page 21 of the PDF at the very top, and that's the total grants figure, 32.804 million. My question is really, is there a similar figure which we can compare it to, which is the spend? I appreciate there's a number of different usages of the grants that we've had, but there's nothing that appears to marry up against that. And the reason I'm asking in particular is there are other things in the report later on which refer to other costs not directly associated with COVID, but are indirectly related. For instance, there's a reference in client debt as a figure, page 33 of the report or page 35 of the PDF. And there's other references later on to having to have unbudgeted hit on salary negotiations, non-pay inflation. So I'm just wondering if we can get a table that shows here's what we've got in the way of all grants, and here's what we've paid out, which is related to COVID.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was rather hoping that Mr. Salmon would be with us this morning to help us out, but he's on leave today, so unfortunately not able to give the details around that. Have you got anything you can add to it, John?
Yes, so at the next meeting with the performance report, the intention is to attach a copy of a report that the audit section have done in terms of our finances through COVID. So basically, it's focusing on the decision making around the whole sort of £92 million of grant that we've had, etc. But there are various tables in there that show how it's been spent, etc. So that will be coming to you with a performance report at the next meeting.
Okay, I welcome that. And as I say, we need to also relate it to things that might not be directly COVID costs, but are necessary costs that have been produced as a result. No other people have indicated. Can I therefore ask another question I'd prepared, as I did manage to get through this report? There's various references to digital inclusion or digital exclusion. I can't remember the location where I read it, but we're giving away old laptops. And I just wondered how we're endeavouring to reach the people who are most digitally excused, if that's possible. Are we able to identify how we go about reaching people?
Morning, Chair. So we've set up a steering group that is looking after delivering the Digital Inclusion Action Plan, which includes the recycling scheme. On there we have colleagues from the community learning team who are obviously tapped into the frontline delivery of community learning around digital skills. And we're also working very closely with the VCSE sector in Staffordshire as well to, like I say, make sure that we are trying to target those devices to the areas and the communities most at need. But again, I can take away from today finding out some more detail on that and bring that back to you.
Okay, I'm pleased to hear you mentioned VCSE, because obviously they will be eyes and ears on the ground. Councillor Pert.
Thank you, Chairman. Can we just have a quick conversation on debt? We've spoken previously, I'm referring specifically to page 33 and 34. We've spoken previously about the level of debt that is owed to the council through principally what will be health and social care client debt. And we'd had previously some assurances on that, and yet it continues to grow. I note that you've set up a working party, so clearly you've got some of the same concerns that I would have, and I would be interested just in terms of where you see that debt going medium term, and whether there are lessons to be learned to be able to pull that back in soonest, because the longer it sits out, the less likelihood we have of recovering it, which is probably why the debt is growing.
Mr. Chairman, client debt is a very, very difficult thing to get back. And people who are in receipt of care, and we are in the interim funding them until we can claim our money back, we have to wait until a certain point in their life, don't we, to get it back. And so if people are receiving care for a long period of time, then it takes some time for us to get it back, because we have to go through probate and everything associated with that. So as the number of people who are in receipt of care increases, so I would anticipate the client debt would increase until they're no longer with us, at which point we recover that. So it is very difficult to predict. You will know that as far as care is concerned, there are three factors that contribute to the cost of care. Volume, that is the number of people in the system. Acuity, that is how sick they are when we start looking after them. And price, how much we have to pay for their care. All three of those things are on the increase. The number of people receiving care we've held it steady for some time, but we would anticipate it's going to increase. Because people are out of the care system for longer, by the time they're presenting to us, they've got more conditions that need to be looked after. And the price, as you know, because the national living wage is coming through and the increases associated with that, and also competition for employment, that means that those three factors combining are making the cost of care increase. That means that I would anticipate the debt going up because the costs are going up, but we do recover that once those people are no longer with us. So long-winded answer, not satisfactory, because I can't anticipate how that would start to come down, but maybe the working group will come up with an alternative solution.
Councillor Pert, to come back.
Thank you. Absolutely appreciate that we need to look after people, particularly the most vulnerable, and we need to find a mechanism for doing that. The bit which was probably the surprise was the target for this year is £5 million different to what the reality at the moment is. And so I've not really understood, I think the inference from what was said was that the target is unrealistic. And I was in some ways looking for some comfort that the money was being recovered as soon as it was possible, after that support wasn't needed. I think you're absolutely right about needing to provide the support. It's the after that effect, do we have the right processes in place? That's the first question, to recover the money, because obviously the longer it goes on, the less likely how we are to pick that up. And second of all, is that £4 million target absolutely realistic? Because it probably has an effect on your cash flow.
Mr. White.
I think the target's probably ambitious, using the political euphemism, really. But John's going to tell me it's not ambitious.
No, I am going to confirm that it is ambitious. I think if you go back a year ago, our client debt was actually slightly larger than it is now, about 10 million rather than 9 million sort of figure we've got now. So it is an ambitious target. I think we are chipping away at it very, very slowly. I think if you look at the figures in the report, they've gone down by a few £100,000 over the past quarter. But yes, we are a long way away from where we need to be in terms of that client debt, and that's why we've got the working group to really focus on that and make sure that we do start to get that number down quite quickly.
But we're not sending around the heavies, Mr. Chairman, if that's what Councillor Pert is worried about.
Absolutely not.
Councillor Conor-Wyman.
Fantastic. I can get my second go. I've been sat here. It's all right, Chair. It's still focused on children's services. I just wanted to kind of go further in terms of the finances of that. So on paragraph 40, it says forecast overspend of 1.657 million. And then third sentence down, it says that was partially offset by staff vacancies. Now, I know, and having seen an organogram of staff vacancies across the children's services sector in Staffordshire, there are a huge amount of vacancies within that. Does that mean that once we fill those vacancies, that overspend will increase or not? And tying it in with the fact that children in care, the numbers of children in care are rising, do we need a plan B?
First of all, the transformation programme, when successful, will deliver fewer children in care. The key to the success is making sure that we have the right staff in place in the right place who are appropriately qualified to deliver that transformation. So I suppose it's a chicken and egg type situation. You put in place the right staff, you start to reduce the number of children in care. I think the number of children in care going up at the moment, or just slight increase at the moment, is a blip. I'm assured it's a blip, and we will start to see that come down in the not too distant future. If it continues to rise, despite the transformation, then we need to have another conversation about how we tackle that and whether or not our assumptions were correct. But I'm confident at the moment that the transformation is the right way to go, and that as those staff vacancies are filled, yes, the cost will increase through those vacancies, through those people being in employment, but the numbers of children coming down will yield up the savings. As you know, the cost of a child in care is eye-watering, and it's that's the first thing to say about it. And the second thing to say about it is putting a child in care is not the best outcome for the child. So both things are by and of themselves good.
Mr. Treadwell, do you want to come in?
Yeah, just to, I suppose, to confirm what the leader's saying on that point. In terms of the strict question, will the actual costs go up and our overspend go up if we get the staffing that we need? In one sense, you could say yes, then our costs will go up, but it's having those staff on board that will enable us to start to tackle that level of children in care. We need the social workers badly so that we can focus on making sure that only the right children are taken into care, and making sure that those children are not in care for longer than necessary, and getting the staff on board is absolutely critical to that. That is a great challenge to us. There is a national social care staffing crisis, and we're doing everything we can to make Staffordshire the most attractive authority for social workers to come and work for, and I think we're having some success in that, and our transformation will help us with that. So I think there is a bit of a time lag between us needing to get these staff on board that will then enable us to tackle those numbers and start to bring them down.
Councillor Wyman wanted to come back.
Yeah, and just building on a point that the leader touched upon, we do talk, and I was talking about it, we do talk a lot about children in care numbers, but not necessarily we're talking about performance report, but we don't talk about our care leavers and what the outcomes are for those children, potentially adults at that stage. It would be nice perhaps to see something about the outcomes of those children and to treat them as such rather than just pure numbers, because it is something we do, and it would be nice to see a little bit of a change there.
Comment?
Yeah, that's a really good suggestion from Councillor Wildman. We have a number of really great success stories with our care leavers, and given the difficult circumstances that some children in care come to us with, to see a good number of them coming out and being successful is really wonderful. So thank you for that suggestion. We'll pick it up.
Okay, no other indications on that. Oh, Councillor Pert.
Thank you. Just wanted to pick up the comments in the paper on capital asset sales. Because actually some of the assets that we have, things like farms, are not hugely popular with other county councils, and they've rationalised theirs down to very small numbers. And I think we've been very good in trying to bring people into that profession by maintaining our farms and our estates. The question that the asset sales raised in my mind, particularly as it came to about 17 million over the next 2 years, is there a strategic plan that is backed up so that we don't inadvertently exit things that we'd want to stay aligned to long term?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We give a great deal of consideration to our asset sales, and you've raised the point about farms. As Councillor Heath would say, I'll put words into her mouth, we're not making any more land, okay? And it's quite important that we don't just say, well, let's throw everything out and let's just sell everything and see what we can come up with. First of all, that would be bad estate management, and it would also be bad property management because we'd be flooding the market and wouldn't get good value for the taxpayer. And second is that there are some farms which are only ever going to be farms because within the local plans of the districts and boroughs across the county, that's the intention. There's no intention to release them for anything other than that. But there are some areas across the county which are strategic sites where you could say, well, actually, we have a land holding here, and it's in our best interests to retain this for the time being because we could get more value for the taxpayer if we sell it at an appropriate time. So, yes, there's a lot of thought that goes into these things before any decision is made around particularly the farms. We are unusual as a county council, having as many farms as we did. This dates back to, I think, post-First World War, where it was an opportunity to give those Tommies coming back from the front line an opportunity to set up with their own small holding. It's been a good legacy. We've had some great results. We've had a young farmer in, is it your neck of the woods? Yeah, your neck of the woods. Who's done particularly well. I remember reading the reports about his success maybe 6 months or a year ago. So, long-winded answer to your question, but we're not just going to chuck everything out at all, not by any stretch of the imagination.
Councillor Heath did indicate before being quoted.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm pleased to hear that you listen to what I say sometimes, Leader. We're not making any more. It's a small island. Everyone needs food. The farms are there for a reason. They were there to help people start to get into the industry. Unless you're a farmer's son today or you've got an inlet, it's very, very difficult to get onto the farming ladder because the land is so expensive. It goes more and more expensive. I don't know why we do it really, because the income for the money invested is minimal. But it's a way of life, and it's a British way of life. And, you know, these lads on the county farms, they're dedicated. They work 7 days a week, all hours of the day. And for a lot of them, if they've not got family connections, that is their only entrance. We have cut the farms down. I think there's 86 left at the moment. There used to be over 100. Some of the ones that are non-viable because a long time ago when they were set up, a small farm made a living. Now, you need an X amount of land to survive. And a lot of our farmers also have outside jobs. You know, they work in the middle of the day for something else or someone else. And I would hate to see that all the farms disappear. We need them. And, you know, if you sell the goose that lays the golden egg, you've no more eggs, have you? They provide an income every year. The asset grows in value every year. It's an asset that you can borrow against or use for other things. And I hope that they're never sold as long as I'm living.
Okay, thanks for that, Councillor Heath. If there are no other indications, we'll conclude on that item and move on to the next one, which is equality.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question on the item?
Yeah, certainly.
Of you, as Chairman of the committee, I would like to get a sense of how much detail you require as part of these Q2 reports. There's been some very detailed questions, for example, when I would anticipate the carbon reduction for street lighting and things like that. These are questions to which I won't have the answers necessarily to my fingertips. Is it satisfactory for you to receive an answer later, or do you expect to receive an answer during the course of the committee meeting? Because we'll have to restructure the way the respondees address your committee in order to give you satisfactory answers, if that's the case.
Well, I will speak, and then others disagree. I think if we have a response shortly after the meeting, that'd be fine. Is everybody in agreement with that? So I don't think we're looking for a restructure of the way that we've presented the information. We have discussed about something else in the MTFS group in terms of presenting information, but I don't think we particularly want to change the structure of the report for that reason. Okay, nobody's disagreeing. Right, so the next item is equalities, diversion and inclusion. And I don't know who's going to take us through on that.
Mr. Chairman, the head of HR is just waiting outside. Would you mind allowing her to join us?
Yes, certainly. I think you're arriving on this item is a phone a friend. We're on to equalities, diversion and inclusion, all the other things that are in the title there. So I'll give you a chance to get settled. We've had the report. We're having a great deal of time to look at it, but I think this is one of the ones that was late on being submitted through anyway. But what we're looking for is an outline, if you will, in terms of what we're looking at with the report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yeah, I'm very pleased to present to you the Equalities, Diversity and Inclusion Report for Staffordshire County Council. The report sets out in detail our principles from in paragraph 10 of the report. Let me just get to it. I used to like paper, I've got to say. Where Staffordshire is a place where there is an equality of opportunity for all, regardless of circumstances. We're an inclusive and diverse employer where people feel they have the opportunity to succeed and progress. And the County Council develops and delivers services that are inclusive and accessible to all. And the objectives of this, the Equality and Diversity and Inclusion Plan, are to review and strengthen our recruitment and retention processes and practices, review and strengthen our diversity and inclusion training offer to employees, strengthen our approach to engaging and collaborating with our workforce and communities on diversity and inclusion issues, raise awareness of and celebrate diversity. We've got a range of stakeholder feedback, which is on page 53 and afterwards. But I'd just like to say that it is our objective to be an employer that celebrates equality, diversity and inclusion. But as we move forward post-pandemic, I have concerns around the working from home component, which has been taken up by many, many people. And what happens once we stop working from home or there remains an alternative to working from home. Some people will have read in the media over the past few days concerns around, for those people who can come back into work, they will take up that opportunity, and those water cooler chats that take place will take place. And for those people who would opt to continue to work from home, they will be excluded from those water cooler chats, which is basically intelligence about what's going on in the organisation. It is opportunities to network, make yourself be known. My concern is that those people who choose to continue to work from home may well be predominantly female because of childcare responsibilities and other factors at home, and those people who choose to come back into work may well be predominantly male, and we might set up some sort of inadvertent inequalities as a consequence of the opportunity to work from home. And I think we will have to address that as we move forward out of the pandemic. We'll have to continue to monitor our employees, see which people are coming back to work, or which people are coming back to the office, should I say, that they're still working from home but not in the office, so that there isn't some sort of inadvertent bias built into the system as a consequence of the return from COVID. I'll hand over to Sarah to say a few words. Sarah.
Thanks, Alan. As Alan said, tackling inequalities is absolutely at the heart of everything that we do. We've brought a whole range of topics to this committee previously, including the gender pay gap. There's been a significant amount of work taking place over the last 12 months as we emerged out of our initial response to the pandemic and part of our recovery work to consider what more we could do to understand how we can continue to strengthen our approach to equality, diversity and inclusion. And as Alan has said and is contained within Appendix 3 of the report, that has included engaging with a range of stakeholders, including our own staff, elected members, trade union colleagues and some representatives from our local communities in terms of community leaders. That feedback in turn has informed what we are proposing and is included in the draft cabinet paper that's been shared with you today, which includes 3 overarching principles, 4 specific objectives for 2021-2023, and also includes a proposed associated detailed action plan which commits us to the practical things that we want to do over the next 12 months and beyond. The Cabinet paper also sets out our legal duties as part of the Equalities Act 2010 and also particularly focuses on our duty to publish our equality objectives. So subject to Cabinet approval, we would be seeking to publish those on County Council's internet. We're asking for your feedback today on views in relation to both the report itself and also the proposed actions within the action plan. But before we seek your feedback, just like to invite Kerry to add a little bit more detail in relation to the proposals. Thank you.
As set out by Councillor White and Sarah, that action plan is focused on the practical actions against each of the 4 proposed objectives, which Councillor White has run through. Just to flag, it is an initial action plan, and we will continue to evolve and develop that over time, further seeking out best practice and ongoing engagement with a range of stakeholders to ensure we're on a continuous journey to develop our approach and commitment to equalities and diversity. We will also ensure there's an annual monitoring report is produced, which helps to evidence the progress that we are making as a county council against the principles, objectives and action plan. And at that point, welcome the committee's feedback on both the report and the action plan.
Councillor White again.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate you've only had a few hours with this report, so if no feedback is forthcoming this morning as a consequence of the short time you've had with the report, we'll be able to keep it open for a week for further comments from the committee as they have time to digest the paper.
Councillor Pert, first of all.
Thank you. I welcome the report. I think it is really important that the County Council is seen as an employer of choice and that equally it takes a role in encouraging people to look at the public sector as an employer of choice. Because if we don't do that, we're failing our residents in that. I did just want to make 3 points, however. First point relates to schools. I think if we're going to change people's perceptions of the county council being an employer of choice or the public sector being an employer of choice, we have to start much earlier. We can't do it when they're just entering the employment market. You know, we have to try and make this as a career choice. And I think we could do more trying to engage with schools just to put on people's radars some of the sectors that we know are short of staff, because actually much of this is determined many years before. Second point I want to make is we should hold our partners to the same standards as we hold ourselves with this report. And I would hope that people like Amy, Nexus, and any other names that we can think of, Entrust, actually also signed up to this as a minimum standard so that we are very clear in terms of our endeavours. Thirdly, I wonder whether some thought could be given to secondments, because actually seconding people in and from other areas might be a way of getting people to see the county council as a employer of choice, and also might encourage some of those people who might come from ethnically diverse places who wouldn't necessarily see the county council as a place to go and work, and might encourage them so that the county council looks like our communities, because I don't think it fully does just yet, but I think this takes us further forward.
Okay, Councillor White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor Pert, they're very helpful suggestions, I remember being at school and being offered careers advice many years ago, and the army was one of the things that was mentioned, but nobody mentioned going to work for the borough council. So presumably things have moved on apace, but I'll find out, and let's see if we can include that as part of the careers advice from schools. As far as partners having the same standards as we do, Mr. Tradewell will be far better placed than I am to talk about the tendering process and what we expect as part of the tender process when we receive those. Amy in particular is tendered for this work and won the contract, and as we move forward for re-tendering on various contracts, I would hope to see that is included as part of it, the expectation that they at a minimum meet our standards. Nexus and Nexus as a arm's length subsidiary, I think you can guarantee, given the fact that there are board members, senior board members from this authority on the Nexus board, that will ensure that takes place. And then the final point about secondments, that's a really interesting suggestion. I think some secondments do secondments take place now? I'm looking at, yes, they do. I thought some secondments took place now, but yes, it's a useful way forward. So thank you for those suggestions, really helpful, Mr. Treadwell.
Okay, next comments from Councillor Tina Clements. Oh.
I'm just going to add a few points, if I may, Chair. I agree with the point about schools. It isn't a career choice that's widely known about when people are in the education system. So I don't know, it'd be interesting to know whether Connor, when he was going through his legal training process, whether anyone ever mentioned that the best careers in the law were actually in local government. That's my view, and you know, there are I think over 5,000 solicitors work in local government, so it's a great place to have a career, but it isn't something that people in their training get to know about. It just isn't on the radar, and I agree entirely. We need to be much better at putting that on the radar because we have some great careers. Everyone tells me that young people these days, a huge factor in their choice of what they want to do is they want to sort of make a difference. They want to put something back into their communities. And I don't think there's anywhere better than local authorities where people can make a difference in their communities. And we really do need to get that message across through our recruitment and, as you say, get in there earlier. Partners, I will need to check what requirements we do put into our contract around equalities. I think it is a really good point. And we have some big re-procurements coming up soon, and we need to make sure that it's fully covered in there, so I agree entirely with that. And then the point around perceptions of local authorities, I think is a really good one as well. I think we did a bit of survey work, and people out there think that local authorities are full of white middle-aged males. As an authority, I think we're something like, getting on for 80% now, female as an organisation. People just don't realise that. And again, I think we do mirror our community in terms of that ethnic mix, but again, the public perception isn't that that's the case. We are open to people from all sorts of backgrounds. We have people from all sorts of backgrounds working for us, and somehow we do need to change that perception with people, and I think secondments is another way that we can keep doing that. So yeah, I think those are great suggestions.
Thank you. Councillor Clements.
Thank you, Chair. It's almost like the leader read my notes this morning. My first point was going to be how we are going to monitor who is working where and why, because I do feel that certain people will want to come back into the office, as we call it, and some people will get left behind probably if they are working from home, and those people will predominantly be females working from home with childcare and children. So that was my first point, and you've kind of answered how we're going to do that. Also, what is productivity like with people working from home? I can only speak on my local authority, Tamworth, and we found that productivity went up with people working from home because they'd work during the day, perhaps go and pick up the kids or come home from work and then go onto their laptops and be answering queries again. So productivity did actually go up there. I'd be interested as to what's happening with Staffordshire. And the other point I was going to make was about the gender pay report. Where are we compared to other local authorities with this? Thank you, Chair.
Councillor White?
I'll ask Sarah Getley to speak to the details around productivity in the gender pay report, but just on a wider point to do with productivity, whilst I do take your point about people going to drop off children at school, perhaps if there's a school bus they might not need it, touche, and then coming back, children come home from school, then they crack on again. I'm not a big fan of that. Okay, I don't. There is a sort of 24/7 culture of being always on, and I think in order to preserve employees' mental health, I do think people need to turn off. And I make a point of trying to avoid sending emails after a certain period in the evening because I know that if I send an email out, a member of staff will respond to it, and actually they're supposed to be relaxing, sort of getting themselves back together again in preparation for the following day's onslaught, or should I say day at the office. But I do think it's quite important that people do have rest time, and that rest time is preserved. I've seen private sector employers have now started saying, well, there is to be no emailing after a certain period of time in the evening, so that people do get that time to themselves. But to the productivity and gender pay.
Thank you. Really good points made. And pre-COVID, we have been working to a smart working agenda in any case. So we already had that degree of flexibility in terms of people having a choice to some degree where they work from, obviously business need being absolutely paramount. We have throughout COVID, and will continue to do so, test the temperature via staff surveys. So making sure, being concerned to make sure that people aren't feeling isolated, that they are feeling supported, are being productive. So we've done that at different points over the last 18 months. The next survey is due out later in November. As you know, the buildings have been open throughout and are COVID secure. Managers have worked with their own teams to identify on an individual basis if staff need to come into the office, even if not for their role, but because working from home just isn't suitable for them for whatever reason. So we are also monitoring the usage of the buildings. So that is through the desk booking system and also the swipe access into the building. So we can see how that has changed over the period from sort of March last year when we obviously moved to working from home. It's something that we are monitoring. We're having dialogue as a wider leadership team with the directors on a regular basis to really check in constantly where individual teams are working. So there are a couple of case studies that have been done that evidence increase in productivity, the call centre, contact centre being one of those specific case studies. There isn't anything to suggest that productivity has declined, if anything, largely improved and increased. That's certainly what my own team is saying to me. Obviously, the point that Councillor White has made is really important in terms of well-being. So we've refreshed our well-being strategy and continue to listen and understand how our workforce is feeling. So we're tracking things like referrals to our well-being services and so on. So we have got, I think, a relatively good picture of how the organisation or how our staff are feeling and how they are working productively, whether that's in the office or from home or a mixture of the two. In terms of the gender pay gap for 2020, our pay gap was 10.5%. That was a slight reduction to the previous year, which was at 11%. We're required, as you know, to publish that data each year, so that is published at the end of March each year. because of COVID, the reporting point was delayed, so we reported in October of this year, and that's information that is available. It's really hard actually to compare exactly with other local authorities. What we do know is that the calculation that's used to identify what the gap is so sensitive. Slight changes can influence that percentage, so it does, if you track it throughout the year, it would vary depending on the reporting point. So the makeup of the workforce contributes to that gap. So with Staffordshire County Council, many of the more frontline services that previously were part of the organisation now sit in other organisations, such as Entrust, whereas other local authorities, their makeup of the workforce is actually quite different. So to get an absolute comparison is quite hard. We obviously do look at our comparator in terms of the network, and we're sort of sitting in the middle of that in terms of the highest and the lowest. I don't recall instantly what those percentages are, but I can get that information if that's something that you're interested in looking at. And looking back to previous years by comparison, you can see how, as the face of the workforce changes, as services go in or go out or come back in, that has a drastic effect on the percentages. So you see quite a big move year on year, depending on what that particular year has involved in terms of the workforce itself. Thank you.
Sorry, we'll go on to Councillor Shars-Atkins.
Thank you. I think the point about staff welfare is really important. My daughter's employer, Capgemini, actually picked up on the fact that they thought that she was working too many hours. And I do think it's important that that is monitored, because whatever you say to people, you know, line managers may be demanding, and it may lead some people, perhaps who have got less confidence, overworking. And I'm hoping that we will be monitoring that. If not doing it now, I think we should do in the future. I wanted to pick up on a few things. Presumably we've identified areas where there is lack of diversity in terms of our employment, number one. And number two, presumably our surveys of employees have identified issues of discriminatory behaviour and their experience of the workplace. I mean, I'm hoping that questions have been asked about, not just about recruitment, but actually what their experience is once they're in the workplace. Because in the report you talk about progression, and clearly there will be no progression in terms of diversity if people's experience of the workplace is not positive. So I just want some reassurance on that. And I was surprised on page 54 of this report to have the implication that we advertise internally for staff. I mean, surely that is an absolute no-no in terms of ensuring that we are an equal opportunities employer. I just want the reassurance that we don't just advertise internally for a particular post, because I think that any modern workplace wouldn't conceive that to be appropriate in any way, shape or form.
Could I just, Mr. Chairman, just ask Councillor Atkins just to define diversity? Are you talking about ethnic diversity or male-female?
Well, I'm actually talking very widely. I'm not just talking about gender, ethnic minorities, but I'm also talking about things like autism, because I think that I can talk about this because my daughter's got autism, that brings a huge diversity of thought and ways of working into an organisation. And I think very often people who are high-functioning autistic people bring a huge amount of extra value to an organisation. So I'm talking in the very broad sense. I know it's very difficult to identify people with maybe a different approach as via autism, but I'm talking about a very wide range. And, you know, I come from an area when I used to work for Building Workers Union, and so I know that there's a lack of diversity in certain areas, but I hope that we certainly work towards increasing diversity in the wider sense.
Councillor White?
I'll ask Sarah to deal with the majority of that. I think I agree with you on the diversity points about autistic people. In my workplace, there are a large number of people who you would say were on the autistic spectrum who are able to solve problems that, because they see the problems and the solutions in a very, very different way. I have to say mostly mathematically related and physics related, and that tends to be males actually, but it does bring a new perspective and a new way of solving problems and getting to the solutions. So I agree with you on that one. To the other points, Sarah.
Thank you. One of the pieces of work that we've been doing over the last year, as well as looking at and researching into other organisations and also the stakeholder feedback, is to improve the data that we have on our workforce. So that has improved. So we did have some gaps in some of the information that we were holding. So data on disability, for example, we'd got something like 23% of the workforce that had shared that information with us at the point that they'd been recruited. Data in terms of sexual orientation, also largely incomplete. So on those areas, it's really difficult to compare the workforce demographic to the demographic of Staffordshire. That said, I think as you would probably expect, the data that we do hold in terms of the age profile and gender, almost 100%, we've got that. And in both of those respects, the workforce isn't representative of Staffordshire. We're predominantly, as John has said, a female workforce, so that is disproportionate to the population, and also our age profile is older than the age profile of Staffordshire as a place. We've also spent some time looking at a more granular level of detail in terms of demographic of different parts of Staffordshire, and that does vary from district to district. So we've been doing some more targeted work through the employer brand work that we've been doing and improvements to recruitment to target local communities in different ways to encourage a more diverse candidate and application for the roles that we've got available. We do advertise our roles externally. Not all roles are only advertised internally. I think it's really important that we do give people internally an opportunity for promotion, but not to the exclusion of external candidates. So we do advertise our roles externally. Sorry, Charlotte, could you remind me
I was
of
asking you about the experience of staff in the workplace and whether you were picking up on any discriminatory practices within the workplace in particular sectors, perhaps. It's just that I think it's really important that staff are asked about their experience at work, because otherwise you won't get progression among people with diversity. So I just wanted, and also I think the other issue is that you often will have, areas where the culture is not progressive.
Thank you. Yes, we do seek feedback from staff. Obviously, we do also have formal processes, so that includes grievance, policy and procedure, and bullying and harassment. So if staff have any negative experience, there are formal routes that people can raise those concerns. We also obviously get feedback from staff. We also look at the reasons why people are leaving the organisation. So if there was any indication that that was as a result of how someone had been treated, there are mechanisms and routes that would highlight those concerns. We don't believe that culturally that is the organisation. That doesn't mean that we would be complacent in any way, but there's ongoing work to make sure that we're a really good employer, that our leaders and managers are managing well, that they recognise the particular needs of their own teams, and that they respond positively and deal with any particular challenges that may arise.
I mean, my concern is that I think that we mustn't just wait for complaints. We have to actively seek the views of staff, because I think to actually put your head above the parapet and, you know, make a complaint can be very difficult in some circumstances where you have maybe a manager who's not performing as he or she should. So you do actively seek views, so that's excellent. And the last point is, are all our buildings accessible?
Thank you. Yes, we do seek feedback as an ongoing basis. We also look at different data sets, so we will look at absence data, turnover data, and so on. So if we determine through looking at and analysing different data, if that suggests that there may be an underlying cause, then we go and do some targeted work with particular teams. So often other data may suggest there's an issue, obviously not relying on individuals feeling brave enough to come forward. Sorry, what was the last?
No, that was just about the accessible,
yes.
buildings.
All our buildings are accessible.
Thank you.
Could I just caveat that slightly? It isn't possible to say that all our buildings are accessible for the simple reason that we are landlord. We own buildings that people have leased from us for many, many, many years. So if you were to perhaps go to a farm that's tenanted, the person has been in there for years, I can't guarantee that that is necessarily the case, even though it's effectively within public ownership. So it's a slight caveat to that.
It always worries me when, for instance, come election times, you will find some polling stations are not actually accessible, and they expect people with disabilities to vote outside.
Yeah, that's quite correct. I think we've probably all encountered that as elected members. But I suppose I'll have to roll out my excuse, which is that polling places are a matter for the district and borough councils, but I'm sure that returning officers at county council elections, or the deputy returning officers coordinated by the returning officer, the county council election will be reminded of their requirement to make them accessible. You know,
I realise that that's not a county council's responsibility, but it's often happens, and it happens, you know, far too often, and it's really demeaning.
Okay, Councillor Bob Spencer is next.
Chair, thank you. I think the first part of the question I was going to ask has already been hinted at, other than I just wonder how, when I looked at the report, I thought the report was excellent, but to be fair, it's full of those things that you would expect it to be full of. I just wonder whether there is anything a bit more proactive around, for example, we have quite a few vacancies, so presumably people must have left the organisation. And the use of things like exit interviews to find out why people are leaving. I think we can sometimes make the assumption it's just because they want better pay or more money. Certainly from my experience, that's not always the case. And we were talking earlier about how attractive the local authority is as an employer to maybe young people leaving school. A little like other organisations, the police force in particular, from my experience, you would expect that you'd work your working life in these organisations. And actually that's probably not the case now, but I think people do naturally move around for a variety of things. And certainly things like a lack of security, endless reshuffles that organisations go through is upsetting to people, and it may not just be the fact that people are moving on to get more money. So I do wonder whether we understand that picture. Certainly if we have a lot of vacancies, then presumably a lot of people must have left. How sure are we that we have a good understanding of the reason that those people left? I think it reflects the question that was asked before. And one of the other things that I didn't see it in the report is we talked about supervision and how people are managed in the organisation. And we very often talk about, whether the pressures that supervisors are putting on people. And that's important, of course. But people also do want to be supervised, don't they? And I think if we're moving into an area where we see a lot more working from home, people want to know what the expectations are of them. That's not a negative thing. I think people look for that structure and look for that expectation. And I know anecdotally we've had some reports here previously about events that have happened. And unfortunately, the level of supervision has been questioned in this organisation. So I do wonder whether this sort of report should be a bit broader about the working experience, and in particular, how people are managed and supervised within the organisation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spencer. Some two really good points there about exit interviews and supervision. I think exit interviews are a really good idea. We can't make assumptions that they're going to better places. We need to, if they're leaving because they're unhappy with the organisation, then it's important we understand the basis of that unhappiness. Some people leave because they don't get on with their boss, and there's not a great deal you can do about that. But obviously Sarah might be able to give a few more details. To supervision, I think that's part of the managerial skill, isn't it? Understanding what supervision somebody needs. Some people like to be given a pile of work, told to get on with it, and then they come back when it's done. Some people like reassurance as they're going along and like to check in with their boss and see if it's going right. And it's the art of it, really, and the skill that we need to encourage in our managers is to make sure they understand what sort of supervision people need. It is particularly difficult, and my wife's experience around working from home bears this out. It's particularly difficult when you are working from home. This morning, she's having a social with her teammates via Zoom. Now, I'm not quite sure how you do that, but apparently Sanofi thinks it can work. But whatever is required in these new circumstances, I think it's worth taking a look at it and see if it can work for us. We know that the chairman of the authority held her annual Christmas party last Christmas via Zoom. And for those of us who endured the carol singing over Zoom, some things you've got to acknowledge just don't work, okay? But Sarah, any comments on to add to that?
Thank you. Really valid points again. We do have exit data, and obviously we take that very seriously, but that's not the only data source that we rely on. I think the point about, could this report be broader, hopefully just to assure you that certainly the workforce elements of the action plan do sit within the broader people strategy. So there's a whole range of work that we have done already and continue to prioritise. I lead the corporate people services function, so a lot of the work within the people strategy is what my team focuses on. And that has included looking at the formal management structure in terms of supervision and performance reviews and so on. Clearly through the pandemic we've had to rely on our managers being really quite creative, working with their teams to make sure those regular touch points are in place. Obviously some groups of our staff have professional requirements in terms of supervision. Those are also supplemented by what we have called We Talk. So that is our people performance management system, and that's very much designed so that there is a framework that managers with their individual team members contract and agree with each other the nature of that contact, the frequency, what the focus of those conversations are, and that would include a whole range of things in terms of being clear on what objectives someone is working to provide, having conversations about career aspirations, development needs, well-being issues. So it's quite a rounded framework whereby those supervision conversations will also be taking place, but much broader conversations to make sure that that individual's experience is positive, but equally a manager is assured that that member of staff has got the right skills to do their job, is getting that support and so on.
Is that okay for you, Councillor Spencer?
Thank you. I just wanted to make the point. I don't think sometimes we see supervision as being a negative, and we were talking about grievances. Certainly from my experiences, the number of grievances in organisations is quite small. It is about using the skills of supervision, as you've already outlined, which is very encouraging to actually support people.
Okay, next to speak is Councillor Mike Davis.
Thank you, Chairman. A comment was made earlier that our workforce is 80% female. But how many of those 80% hold managerial, if you like, wider leadership or senior leadership? Is there any way of banding it so we can say, well, yes, you know, it's proportionate or it's not proportionate?
Thank you. Yes, the gender pay gap is broken down in terms of reflecting our grading structure. So again, I'm more than happy to provide that detail, and we do look at it from a grade perspective, so we can see how the workforce demographic changes both from directorate perspective types of roles, but also from sort of the throughout the full grading structure up to the chief executive and the directors.
Councillor Davis?
I think through you, Chairman, I think I would really think that would be very informative to look, and it will give us the bigger picture, if you like, how people are moving through the grades.
Councillor Wyman.
Thank you. I'll try to be quick. Just two questions. One is about monitoring. So I know that in the plan you can see that we're going to be monitoring the outcomes and the performance of trying to embed the diversity and inclusion agenda across Staffordshire. There must be. Oh, hey, I'm on. Right, okay, so monitoring, I'll repeat the question again. In the plan you can see that we are going to be monitoring diversity and inclusion across the county, or Staffordshire County Council at least. Do we need to be playing a role as this committee, or certainly as the council, of monitoring that? So do we need a report here every 6 months just to make sure that we are meeting our goals? That's the first question.
Mr. Chairman, the Cabinet gets a report annually on the gender pay gap and other issues. And we can bring it here every year as well for you to monitor that, if that's satisfactory.
Yeah, I think if we're going to embed it into the whole organisation, then we as members, perhaps best start focusing on it as well. That would be my suggestion. And the second point is around, I didn't see anywhere within the plan around embedding diversity and inclusion in the staff kind of performance framework. So if someone was going for promotion, for example, they may need to evidence that they've been involved with the diversity and inclusion agenda across the county. Is that something that we would look to do? It certainly is in my organisation that I work for. We need to be evidencing that we have been involved and actively engaged with that agenda. I wonder whether it's something that we could bring to this organisation.
Thank you. We do include in all of the job profiles a statement that is a commitment, so we do seek and expect individuals to be positive advocates. So what you would then expect is those conversations to take place between a manager and a member of staff to understand practically what that means for that particular individual in their role.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, could I just seek clarification from Councillor Wyman? Are you talking about ongoing training in the subject as well?
Yes. Yeah, so you could evidence, well, I've been to this training, this training, this training. I've been a positive advocate for this particular person. They've struggled, tried to kind of get involved with things, and I've kind of been an ally for them and that sort of thing. And I suppose if that was part of the promotion, then that would be potentially a good thing.
Thank you. Sorry, yes, as part of the induction programme, any new member of staff does participate in training, and in addition to that, as part of a requirement to do that, and that is reported on, so we monitor the staff that have completed that as part of the induction. There is an ongoing development programme. There's content included in our learning experience platform, which is our online training. So you will see, as part of the action plan, to further refine and improve that development offer. both for when we're able to face-to-face learning, but also through the digital content that we have, which will supplement the content that new members of staff receive through their induction process.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Wyman?
I think so. I think it's a point where if you were moving from one position to another, you would then be able to evidence that you've done certain training, but not just the kind of mandatory training that you should be doing at any organisation, but actually showing that you're potentially an ally to someone in your team or something of that nature, to show you're actually actively doing something in addition to just kind of attending a piece of training for 10 minutes or something like that. And if it was in our performance framework, then you might find that a lot of more people find the time to get engaged with that rather than being distracted from other things in the day job. That's just my own suggestion, and I've seen it done before.
Okay, I haven't had an opportunity to speak on this, and there's a couple of things I would like to suggest. We've had that many comments that have come in. I didn't see the need, but there are a couple of things that I would like to see in terms of what's presented in front of us. There's been various opportunities where we've talked about various measures, and for me, I'm figures driven, but for me there are figures missing here. I expected a table which gives us some indication of how we're representative in the workforce, because if we're talking about minorities and wanting to have a diverse workforce, we need to have some indication of where the shortcomings are, where the targets might be. I mean, for instance, I've made a note of things that have been mentioned in passing. We've got older workforce than the county in general. John Treadwell mentioned about 80% female as a stat. We talked about the gender gap and so on and so forth. But unless we know somewhere what our targets are, what we should be achieving, how do we know how close we are? So from a point of view of what's our makeup of employment, where we needed to give our attention. And the other thing that I would mention is the engagement workshops. And in terms of engagement, we've engaged with staff, unions, community stakeholders and members. Well, the one group that we're not identifying with are the minorities and those groups that are representing minorities. So for instance, do we or should we engage with ethnic minority groups, gender campaign groups, disability groups and so on and so forth? And I'll give you one example which is really powerful, and it's a current one, and I never thought I'd be saying this today, but when you watch Strictly and you see somebody who's deaf demonstrating what it's like to be having that disability, it's quite soul-searching for those people who didn't know how powerful that can be. And so therefore, the minorities that we're talking about, perhaps to get engagement from them, is quite influential to us realising in a majority what those issues are. So we're talking about recruitment and retention. Maybe we should hear more from those people who are disadvantaged in some ways.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You make some really useful suggestions there, which we will pick up on. Just in terms of the consultation with black and minority ethnic groups and other disability groups, one of the things we do have to be slightly careful of is that some people put themselves forward purporting to be representative of a group, and actually they're just representative of their own views. So when we do engage with those groups, and I have done so through the health and care portfolio over many years, had people in front of me who say, I represent disability rights campaigners, and you say, well, you know, exactly how many people are in your group? Well, me and my mum. It's quite important that we make sure that these are reflecting the true breadth of the experience of those people in those groups that you've referred to. But we can pick that up, can we, Sarah? Yep. And thank you for that suggestion. We'll include that as part of our considerations.
Okay, I think we've given that item a good pasting. Can we go on to item 5, which is the VCSE capability building item? Who's going to present that for us?
Chair, just say Councillor Victoria Wilson is waiting outside to come in for this agenda item.
you want to take a seat down the bottom end? Or wherever you feel comfortable? Good morning, Councillor Wilson. We've just reached the point of the VCSE capability building paper which is in front of us. Would you like to introduce it?
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. Lovely to see you, Bob. So I'm here today to bring you a report that we're taking to Cabinet next month regarding the voluntary community and social enterprise sector contract. Well, we've all seen firsthand, haven't we, the fantastic work that the VCSE sector has done in our communities, and this has never been more evident than during our response to COVID-19. The VCSE sector has really stepped up to help our communities when they needed it most, and they will continue to do so. However, the VCSE sector is also dealing with challenges of its own, including adapting to COVID-19, meeting rising demand, and managing resources. A strong and sustainable VCSE sector is vital to Staffordshire's communities and the ongoing recovery from the pandemic. Since 2016, our VCSE Strategic Capacity Building Partnership contract has supported the VCSE sector and worked alongside the Council to help develop and deliver our strategic priorities. The relationships built as part of this contract have also been vital in supporting the mobilisation of our communities and helping the most vulnerable during the pandemic. However, our current arrangements do come to an end on the 31st of July next year. So with this in mind, we are, as I say, taking a report to Cabinet in December to ask for approval to commission a new VCSE capacity building framework. This framework will look to ensure the VCSE sector remains sustainable, as well as continuing to build capacity in communities to help us to deliver our priorities. And it'll also aim to provide us with a flexible and responsive way to commission work with the VCSE sector as opportunities arise in the future. But before we go to Cabinet, we just wanted to discuss our approach with yourselves and get the views of Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee. And in particular, we wanted to hear your thoughts on the proposals to commission a new framework, as well as your experiences of working with the VCSE sector in Staffordshire, and I'm sure we have many, many positive examples of that. This conversation will help to inform both the report we take to Cabinet in December, as well as the final specification which we hope to take to market early next year. So with your permission, Chairman, if I can hand over now to Kerry, who, as you know, is Head of Strategy and Digital, to provide a more detailed discussion of the draft report and its recommendations. Thank you.
Okay, Kerry.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillor Wilson. So in the Cabinet paper, we have set out 4 proposed overarching objectives for the new capacity building framework, and these objectives do build on the successes of the current contract, which, as Councillor Wilson has outlined, has been in place since 2016. So the 4 overarching objectives are to ensure that the sector remains stable, and especially as the sector and our communities recover from COVID. Build capacity in our communities to help support the County Council deliver its priorities. That's including support around our Supportive Communities programme and the Staffordshire Young People's Offer and our place-based approach. We also want to ensure that this framework provides us with flexibility so that we can commission additional capacity and infrastructure activities as and when we need it during the life course of this framework, as need arises or additional funding arises. We also want to make sure that the framework enables us to have effective yet proportionate arrangements in place between us and the sector, so proportionate contract management arrangements that works for us as a commissioner but also for our providers as well. We're proposing that the framework is put in place for a minimum of 3 years, with the option to extend for a further year, and that will be dependent on both a review of the performance of the framework and the annual MTFS process. We have identified 500k per annum to cover the core deliverables from this framework, and as I've mentioned, there will be flexibility to call off additional work as and when required. And just for context, the current contract is at a level of 442k, so we have been able to secure a small increase in the contract value for this. I'll pause at that point and open up for comments both on the proposals outlined in the paper and, as Councillor Wilson has said, your general views and feedback on the VCSE sector in Staffordshire.
Okay, if I can make a start, I'll give you a bit of my background. I had 30 years in the brewing industry and finished up in marketing. And one of our favourite expressions in marketing is that most, well, at least 50% of marketing spend is wasted. You just don't know which 50%. And the difficulty is identifying what works and what doesn't work. Now, we can all say how valuable the VCSE sector is, but we don't necessarily know what works and what doesn't work. So before we embark on a commissioning of another service, do we have any information from our current providers in terms of where their strengths and weaknesses are, or what we see as working, what doesn't work?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we do. Included in the paper is some headlines from a survey we did earlier in the year to gather views and feedback from stakeholders in terms of the current arrangements. So that was internally with staff, with a broad range of commissioners, and also wider members of the VCSE sector who are actually supported via this contract as well, to get a sense of, as you say, what's working really well. The overwhelming feedback from them was that the support that the sector gets via this contract is hugely valued, especially around training and the advice and guidance that they get via this contract in terms of how they can set up, how importantly they can grow and sustain and access further funding from a variety of different sources, national sources as well, to make sure that those local VCSE groups can remain sustainable and grow. We also obviously have a huge amount of performance information via the existing contract, and just to give you a little bit of a flavour of some of the headlines from that, the existing contract has helped to bring in over £26 million worth of additional funding into the VCSE sector. It's helped over 1,000 different organisations, supported connecting our residents to volunteering opportunities. So we do have a broad range of performance information that supports the contract management that we have again utilised and reflected in terms of starting to develop that specification for the new contract.
Thank you. Councillor Jeremy Pert.
Thank you. Good morning. I think if I preface my comments about the VCSE by saying that I don't think that we would have come through the COVID pandemic last year without each and every one organisation within Staffordshire working together to support all people in our communities. And just one organisation, one of the 1,000 organisations you've just talked about, if one of those organisations hadn't been doing the work they did, that would have put a greater onus and burden on the rest of the organisations, and that could have been a bit like a Swiss watch. The smallest piece needs to work, much like every other piece needs to work. So I really value the work that's done within the VCSE sector. And if we don't invest, if the County Council doesn't invest in the VCSE sector, then who will? So I really value the continuation of the funding to be able to continue this work. And I think putting money into the umbrella organisations is exactly the right way of doing that to ensure the sustainability of and the stability of the sector. However, I've got three thoughts in terms of your core four objectives, and they are as follows. First of all, I'd like to have seen something greater about partnership working. I think it's probably inherent with what happens within the voluntary sector. But actually, I hear too many other partners of the county council referring to working with the voluntary sector and probably not investing anything like this into the VCSE sector, but still looking to do things like social prescribing. And I would really like to see some onus and focus about trying to encourage some better joined-up working. The people like the police, the people like the NHS, our district and borough councils. So I would like to see something a bit more focused on that element. Secondly, I would like to feel that the umbrella organisations that we work with, whoever they are, because this is going out to tender, and I can't tell you who's going to tender or not, but I would like to feel they shared the same organisational values and that they aligned closely with the objectives and culture and values of the county council, and they were true partners to the county council. Thirdly, I would also like to see a forward view. You know, I hear about maintaining the stability of the sector, I hear about building capacity, but I would also like to see what is in the fields, you know, 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, so that, you know, actually we share the same shared journey, and that there is clarity of what that journey ahead is. Because if we don't start planning and preparing now for the next pandemic or the next whatever it is, then I think we've lost some of the lessons that we should have learnt from the last 18 months. And I wonder whether you could talk about those three elements specifically and whether you might consider joining them into your principles.
Is that for you, Victoria?
Yes, thank you. I would definitely recommend more partnership working. Absolutely agree with you there. And I agree that more positive partnership working is definitely something that we need to consider. In terms of the long-term plan, that's a great concept, and I'm going to ask Kerry to elaborate on an answer.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. And just on that partnership working element as well, we continue to have open engagement with other partners who may also want to call off work from this framework as well, and we're building that flexibility in so that if district and boroughs or NHS organisations want to use this framework, they can. And again, we can then ensure it is joined up and not duplicating effort and energy. So we are trying to build that partnership element into the framework itself. In terms of the forward view, yeah, completely agree. We need to have a forward look. It is very tricky. What we are proposing as part of this framework is we sit down with the providers on an annual basis and develop a very specific delivery plan that both looks at the here and now challenges, but also, as you say, tries to look ahead. Obviously, the County Council is currently refreshing its strategic plan, and that will be a key document that we utilise with the successful providers to look at that long-term horizon as well. So a really useful point that we will make sure is built into that delivery plan setting with the successful providers.
Councillor Bob Spencer. So did you want to come back?
Yes, please. There was two points. One is the new integrated care system that is being set up often talks about VCSE. I'm not convinced I've seen what their funding into the VCSE sector is. I wonder whether you'd specifically write to them to let them know of your plans and see whether they will actually put some funding towards this and maybe make that a more strategic direction where you have a joined-up plan with them, with the NHS specifically. And the second point is neither of you mentioned anything about organisational values aligning. And I wondered whether that was deliberate or whether I had made too many points.
I believe I did make some reference to closer partnership working, and that's pretty much as far as I'll go on that, but I take your point, absolutely. In terms of working with the ICS, there are plans afoot in the north of the county to do just that. There is work in the pipeline, but that's probably for another meeting.
Okay, we go on to Councillor Bob Spencer.
Chair, thank you. I thought the report was very good. I do think, and I think I just reflect on what the chair, one of the chair's opening remarks about the 50% of marketing, and we don't know which 50% works. When we talk about what does work and what doesn't work, and it may well just be words, of course, and descriptions, but when we talk about capacity building, there's quite a lot of evidence in the fields of emergency planning and contingency planning. And people will be familiar with comments about building capacity, building resilience in areas and various other phrases. What we know does, and in particular doesn't work, is any type of trying to artificially build capacity or resilience in an area to achieve your particular goals, because people want to achieve their own particular goals. So I do wonder and maybe suggest that if we're going to push this forward and encourage more from the voluntary sector, then we do think about changing some of that language rather than building capacity. And actually, a common phrase that's used now, they talk about building social capital. You may well just think it's a different description. But it is important. I think what building social capital talks about is actually recognising what local people see as the need and how they see that moving on, and actually supporting that rather than artificially trying to build an army of volunteers around yours. And I think we would be pleasantly surprised that when we build social capital, people's ideas around what they want to do very much mirror what the organisation obviously would want to do. One quick observation around partnership building. I think you're absolutely right. We need to do that better. I think one of the hurdles to that is that, you know, we had the 98 Act that talked about how partners should work together, building things called safer neighbourhood panels, not the ones that were used in Staffordshire, but ones under the Act of 98. One of the big problems we have with that is the sharing of intelligence. And there's a lot of hurdles put around how you do that shouldn't be there. And actually they're an obstacle to what we're trying to achieve. I think that there is some promise, though, around certain borough councils and the way that they want to try to achieve that. Certainly in South Staffordshire, we see that moving forward. And I do think if we were to have a look at that, we would see better returns around some of that partnership working. And the last point I would make is, it was interesting, I think you talked about proportionality in this report. I found that quite an unusual phrase to use. That normally means that we only want to achieve what we want to achieve, so there's some sort of balance taking place. I wonder if you could just clarify what you meant by proportionality when it comes to building capacity. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I think it's unbelievable, really, what we've seen happening on the ground in the last sort of 18, 20 odd months, and before that. It's the voluntary groups themselves. They're the ones who know what's needed in their areas. So we're not trying to enforce anything or force anything onto them. They come to us saying, this is our idea, can you help us? And that's kind of what it's all about. And at the same time, we have at the County Council pressures that we're trying to minimise, aren't we? So whatever can be done by these sort of grassroots groups, we want to be able to enable them to do that. As for proportionality, I'll ask Kerry to answer that one.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. That was in terms of contract management and making sure that we are not putting unnecessary burdens on the successful providers, but still ensuring that we can show value for money from the contract. So it's getting that balance in terms of that. That was the reference. Agree wholeheartedly with your points around building social capital and doing it on a strength-based and an asset-based approach, not trying to grow it artificially. Absolutely agree. And again, that's why we want to sit down with the successful providers and produce together that annual delivery plan and agree together where we focus that energy and effort, and that has to be based on what is realistic in our communities and where we see that real strength of feeling in our communities to do more. We absolutely need to support them to grow and develop and create even more social action and social capital.
Thank you. Can I follow up on what Councillor Spencer just said, because it was quoting the comment I made about spend and getting the best out of the money that's being invested. I totally agree that the whole aspect of social capital is one of the priorities, and maybe if it's possible, without being too prescriptive, to try and get into the template of what we want from the organisations, the sort of directions that we maybe want them to give a bit more onus to. And social capital, what I call facilitating social units, is a strong push as far as I'm concerned. We know from the COVID times that there's an element of loneliness that's been discovered. So anything that involves people getting more involved in social groups, coupled with that, encouraging people to volunteer, because obviously if they're volunteering, they're with other people. There are groups that have created from nothing and been very successful. U3A is growing, Knit and Natter groups are growing, Silver Surfers. These are the sort of things that demonstrate that people want to be involved and want to get out, want to be participating. I think the other thing that would be a push, as far as I'm concerned, from the voluntary sectors I've seen, there is a desperate need to get help and training on grant applications. Not just the local authorities, but the Tesco's of this world, some of the bigger organisations that have got money to give out, and people need help on how to get access to that. Coupled with that is the aspect of getting back into social or digital inclusion, being able to get access to these funds. And the last thing I would say, that having attended the climate change conference that we had last week, encouraging groups to get involved in education on climate change, because it's one thing saying we're all conscious of climate change, but having some organisations that can help people understand what they can do that would make a difference. So I don't want to be too prescriptive, but maybe if we can lead some of these organisations in certain directions which achieve us other targets that we're trying to achieve at the same time. Okay, any other comments from anybody? Councillor Pert again.
Can I just ask the question under paragraph 27, page 73 on procurement? There seems to be some reference to EU regulations. I thought we'd left the EU as of the 31st of January 2020. Would you like to explain what the reference to that is, please?
Good spot. Leave it with us, and we will make sure that that paragraph is accurate by the time it gets to Cabinet.
I'm sure Boris will be very pleased.
Councillor Wyman?
As far as I'm aware, we'll still use the EU procurement rules at the county for now, so that will be accurate. But the cost, the TBC bit, will obviously need to be confirmed.
Yeah,
and just from a legal point of view, so we are still following EU regulations, but we've just adopted them as our own, so they are now UK regulations. So the same principles apply now as they did prior to leaving the European Union.
Okay, you don't want to come back on that, Councillor Pert. Okay, anything else on this item? Are we happy with the suggestions that we've made so far? Okay, we'll take that as read and we'll go on to the next item, which is our COVID review, effectively. Not sure who's dealing with that one. Give a bit of time to get to a seat. So this is entitled Impact of COVID-19 on Staffordshire Council Communities, Economy, Organisation and Recovery Progress, update from October 21 and the way forward. Councillor White, are you introducing it?
I am, Mr. Chairman. So when This, I suppose, plays to my previous background in the military. Whenever there is an operational tour of any description, the staff of the organisation concerned, be it battalion, brigade, division, keep what is called a war diary, which is a record of what has happened and how it has been attended to. And when the pandemic kicked off, in conversation with the chief executive, it seemed rather sensible to do the same for this organisation, for the simple reason that we are the people who are doing the first draft of history as we live through this. We looked back at the 1918 flu pandemic, and historians read about how we dealt with that at the time. I think it's quite important that we, as an organisation, as a huge public sector body, put on record for the future how we responded to the pandemic. So you'll see, and courtesy of the team, a very, very weighty tome dealing with each aspect that the County Council has in its orbit, and setting out how we dealt with that during the course of the pandemic. It also looks forward to the future, and so each of those directorates have fed into that. So it's a very broad report, Mr. Chairman, and it's just I'm hoping that we're able to, we have caught at least some aspects of what has gone on. Of course, communities themselves will be writing their own history. You see works of art relating to the time in the pandemic. We've seen images relating to the time in the pandemic. My hope is that this is curated in a way that allows it to be read in 100 years' time. My concern has been, and I've had conversations with the Library Service about how we curate this, that if it's stored in an electronic form, that maybe in 30, 40, 50 years' time, we might not be able to access it. So we need to make sure it's kept up to date. Anybody who is old enough to have purchased a laser disc will know that there is no device now capable of actually playing a laser disc. Of course, some clever bod will have worked it out by now, but all the Laserdisc devices are gone. I presume all Betamax tapes are now defunct as well, but we need to be able to make sure that we can access it. So I suppose by way of a very broad introduction, Mr. Chairman, that would be my take on it. Would you like to add any words to that?
Sorry. I guess as Councillor White has described, the paper is a very broad paper, but it has focused upon those high-level priorities which were agreed by Cabinet for recovery in late spring 2020. And this paper is a second paper which continues to detail that progress. I think we were very aware at the outset of beginning the recovery process that this would not be a traditional recovery from an emergency. Normally, the line is drawn under the emergency and we move into recovery. We have dealt with something that has been incredibly different to that. So in lots of ways, our recovery process has had to run alongside our response process. And as Councillor White has described, it's been really important that we've captured that so that when we do look back on it, we can see how as an organisation and as communities and as the economy we've flexed and learned from that experience to ensure that it informs as we move forward. So the learning which we have taken through this process, and it's detailed within the paper, that has informed the work which is taking place to develop the new strategic plan and also the MTFS. At the beginning of September of this year, we stood down the County Council's large planning and recovery group, and just a small group of us have been meeting on a monthly basis led by John Tradewell, just to monitor our progress, because again, we're very aware of the fact that we may once again have to stand that recovery process back up. And I think that's all that I need to say.
Okay. Can I start with a first question? I looked at the page where it refers to the intention of the report, to note the impact, to note the progress on the reset of the corporate strategy, which I think it does, The third one is noting the high-level priorities, and I just wonder if you said it's gone to Cabinet. I just wonder if there's a higher level of priorities that maybe comes from this. It seems to be very good in terms of what Councillor White's referred to as the war diary. It's very authentic in terms of giving what happened and why it happened and what the actions were taken at the time. I'm just wondering whether the next stage in terms of high priority should be let's concentrate on vaccination programme, let's concentrate on the sort of things we were talking about on the last item, getting people out and participating in events, being part of the social structure again. Let's get our buildings back operating properly. Let's get masks issued everywhere, and so on and so forth. So is there a sort of high level that needs to be almost like a focus point summary?
What you're describing to me, Mr. Chairman, sounds a lot like the new strategic plan, which is in process of being written. I think it'll be because the new strategic plan will come to this committee for consideration. I think if you can compare and contrast the two documents and see if the strategic plan gives you the adequate look forward. The strategic plan sets out what we're going to be doing for the next 4 years. This is, as you've described, the great difficulty here with the pandemic is it's not like traditional engagement in say a conflict zone or something like that, or a police operation. It doesn't start then finish. It is ongoing. So what we've got to do is try and make sure that the organisation is capable of continuing to deliver and respond appropriately as the pandemic flexes around, and also reset our agenda through the new strategic plan. And the new strategic plan, if it ignores the fact that the pandemic is bubbling underneath in the background, that would be a miss. If it reflects that, and this document would suggest to you that the organisation is reflecting that, then that I think would be appropriate. It was the way the organisation stepped up in March and April of I've lost track of the years now, 2020, was amazing. The operations cell that was running the organisation from the ground floor of SP1 felt like, for a former police officer or a former military person, it felt like an operations centre with a meeting that took place twice a day to make sure that everything's on track, that we were delivering what we needed to do, and we were responding as need arose. As time moved forward, things settled down, and we got into this rhythm, this operational rhythm. But we have to move away from that. We have to reset the agenda, and we have to help our communities move forward. I anticipate the new strategic plan will allow us to do that. Janine, anything to add to that?
No, not at all. I think, as Councillor White has described, that new strategic plan, our learning, our experience from the pandemic, our recovery, absolutely feeds into that document.
Any other comments? No? I think this falls under the category of we've had a lot of information there. We haven't had a chance to digest in a great deal of detail, and it's no disrespect to the report, because I have skim-read it and it's very detailed. I think, as Councillor White described it as a war diary, it really does give a sort of historic context to what has happened both in the country and within the county. So the report is very worthwhile doing. As I say, we haven't really had the chance to give it a great deal of scrutiny, unfortunately, though. But thanks for putting it in front of us. Okay, we'll go on to the last item on our agenda, which is the work programme, which is item 7. Any comments on that? We have obviously seen that previously. I don't think there's a great deal of change from the last time. And I think the items that we've discussed as being priorities, both the Vice Chairman are here. We've tried to interpret what we see as being priorities. We certainly want to get the LEP organised and I know we've spoken to Nick about a date that we're trying to line up for that, and that will be very imminent. Are there any other comments on the Councillor Pert?
The date on the diary seems to be the 3rd of December for the lab. But is that going to be in conjunction with Stoke-on-Trent City Council?
Again, we had a conversation about that. We decided that we wanted to not delay, but obviously we want Stoke to be involved in it. So we thought the best bet was we would go ahead and book that session for ourselves and invite Stoke to be involved. Any other comments on the work programme? Okay, if there are no other comments, I'll conclude the meeting. Thanks for your attendance.